Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
All right. I think everyone that we are connected to Studio B now, and so let me know if you can hear me in the chat room, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring Peter on and see if we can get this thing rolling. All right. Thanks for your patience, and again, we apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. Peter, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, and again, I apologize. Let me, I believe we've got everything resolved and the server has been freed up. And as long as everybody is able to hear me in the chat room, we should be good. And once again, I apologize to everybody and to you, Peter, for, the technical issues. It's never happened this way where we've lost one server while the other one was up and remaining. And so thank you for your patience. And I do look forward to um, continuing this discussion, and also know, for those of you that are in the chat room, that Peter has agreed to join us again even before these issues occurred, because in having looked at and studied your work, I know that you have a tremendous amount of knowledge, and I didn't want just to, you know, do a 1 hour or 2 hour introductory to all of your work, because I feel like it's so profound and so deeply introspective that really you would just need that amount of time even to establish the foundation for getting into the deeper aspects of it. And so, if you would please tell people where they can go to support and find your work, and then we'll get into some of the things that you've written about, because I believe you've written more than 16 books. Is that correct?
I've published about 20. Yeah, I've written about 16, more or less. You kind of lose track. I guess when you get up close to 100, you start, counting them.
Yeah, well, that's a very, very profound amount of work.
But in any case, I'm just curious. I was in the chat room a little while ago. I'm not in the chat room now. Do we have much of an audience, period? Because I know we could have lost some of them because of all the technical difficulties.
Oh yeah, no, there's quite an extensive audience, and yeah, if you go to freedomslips.com, you'll see that there are still a large number of people that have been patient and waited for us to resolve the issues. And so now that we're live, yeah, things are, there's still
Okay.
quite a bit of audience, and also there's a lot of people that listen to the archives. So.
Okay, well, I'll start out by, recognizing that many people will be familiar with me that have heard me
Yes.
on Revolution Radio many times before,
Right.
and I know there's always some new people that come along. And right now, I've been in a transition period where you would say that, okay, I'm a writer, and I've written primarily about the subject of time travel and its related tentacles. You just don't write about time travel without having tentacles connected to it, such as issues of control and censorship around technology. Now, my work begins with the Montauk Project Experiments in Time, in which I essentially worked as a ghostwriter, presenting the story and theories of Preston Nichols, an expert in electromagnetics and somebody who experiences in time travel and with the technology of time travel at Montauk, New York, the eastern end of Long Island. This program was primarily during the 70s and very early 80s. Now, from there, I went to investigate his claims and his story. And while most, if not practically all of the data trail was shredded, I began to, when I investigated it, I began to have experiences with synchronicity. We could also call it quantum resonance, which I wrote a subsequent book, Montauk Revisited: Adventures in Synchronicity, followed by Pyramids of Montauk, having found that there were ancient pyramids on that land at Montauk, and that the family name of the local Indian tribe, who were designated as the Royal Tribe of Long Island, were the Pharaohs, with connections to Egypt. Now, that sort of began what I was doing as a writer. But so I was saying that I'm in a transition period right now. I've written for over 20 years, and I'm now in a period where I can go back on all of the writing that I've done, adventures, which includes many adventures, and recapitulate it, go back over, and now, because as you were saying, is the work is very long. It's an intensive study, and there will always be people who will want to read it for the profundity that it offers. But we're now in an age of new media and the soundbite, the Instagram. And for those who follow astrology, I have Pluto going right over my Mercury right now, or sort of hovering over my Mercury, which is of course, the planet of communication and writing. And I was told by an astrologer a few years ago that when this happens, people will have to pay attention to my writing. And I sort of had the opposite effect last year when I released my book, The White Bat, releasing it during a similar period we're in now, Mercury retrograde, because I need to transition into new modes of communication. And this has been done as of November. I signed up with Kajabi software. It's a software program or site that enables you to store all your videos and whatnot. And I've created 9 videos on Time Travel Theory Explained, 7 of which have been released to the general public, which you can access if you go to digitalmontauk.com. Link will take you straight there. Anybody has problems having that work, there's a small percentage of people who can't access the videos. They can write to us at skybooks@yahoo.com, and we can take care of it, guide you through step by step as needed. So these videos explain the theory of time travel, scientifically and mathematically. It's written so that a 7th grader can understand it. And if you can't understand it, it's only because there's a few concepts or words that you need to bone up on a little bit. You can go back and look at it multiple times and you will understand it. It's not that hard. So this has been simplified from the work of Dr. David Anderson, who befriended me in 1999, having read the Montauk Project. And we've had a collaboration over 17 years. And he flew me to Romania in 2008. And he participated with me in seminars in Romania in 2009 and tutored me on some of the concepts that you will see in these videos. They're all simplified from his website, andersoninstitute.com, to bring the whole idea that time travel is simple in its principle. Of course, technologically, It's like, you know how long it took humanity to figure out how to have a color television set that worked. For those of you who weren't around in the early 60s, most of the color TV sets did not work well. And it was only until the 70s that they began working with regularity and no problems. So it's the same with the technology of time travel. You can look at the theory, it can be relatively simple, but there's a lot of work that's gone into it. Of course, now we're at the area of restriction and consciousness and censorship and all this sort of thing. So this is where the work becomes not only interesting, but it becomes challenging and has to be peeled back, because we're dealing with issues of censorship, and that means occult, which means secret or hidden. So that's an introduction to what I've done and what I'm up to now.
Well, I know that the listening audience and the world in general find these topics extremely interesting, and that there's more and more people that are wanting to know. And it seems like you and your colleagues are on the frontiers and are the experts in this area. And the relationships that you have established over the last 20 years really make you and place you as one of the go-to individuals to really be able to understand these concepts, and that you can relate them to people to make them understandable. So if you would, because I know we won't be able to get into a great deal of the particulars. And actually, we'll be right back. Everyone, hold on.
Time for our first break.
Yeah. All right, welcome back, everybody. Peter, I just wanted to give you a chance for those that may not be familiar with your work, which I would find that probably few, that most people are very familiar, but for those that aren't, if you would kind of cover really quick the Montauk side of the things that you've written about in the books and your initial project with Preston Nichols, and then we'll go into what seems to be of very great interest, and that has to do with the base in the Bucegi Mountains, if I said that correctly, and that I have even been covering that and read that article and shared it in shows previous to discovering your work. And so I'm very looking forward to your greater insight into that story, because it is absolutely fascinating. And this is something that we will follow up on in later shows as well.
Okay. Well, my work, public work, begins with the Montauk Project, as I spoke about earlier, which is really the summarized uh, all the news that's fit to print from Preston Nichols, his research of over a decade that he had worked on trying to figure out what happened to him at Montauk. And when I say all the news that's fit to print, Preston was very clear with me at the beginning. He says, I don't want to prove this thing occurred. If I proved it, I'd be killed. And we did establish beyond any shadow of a doubt that there was strange goings on at the Montauk Air Force Station. And the most resounding proof of that was not only, I guess, we monitored and recorded illegal signals taking place as late as the early 1990s, but we also, well, we were investigating, and there was a court case over Preston Nichols and two of his friends being ticketed for being on the base, which was legally designated as a state park. And in New York, if you have a state park, at least two-thirds of the ground have to be designated for public use. And they were chasing people off of there. The New York State Troopers or New York State Park Police were chasing people off there, and they did it in a very nasty way. Park police should be friendly. And so there was a trial over them being ticketed for being on the property, and they actually weren't even on the property. That was the funny thing. They weren't on the illegal part of the property. So they were ticketed. The judge reviewed it, and he basically said, I walk my dog out there. I don't know. You can't be ticketing people if there's not proper signs posted. So there was a court case which Preston and his friends won. It was a small ticket. I mean, we're talking $50 or something. But as a result of that, what happened there, and all of the public fuss that was raised by the books and the newsletters, the state park superintendent, Bernadette Castro, ordered a video from our company that Preston had taken called the Montauk Tour, still available in VHS, which showed, the derelict base and the state it was in. And she eventually got arranged for Superfund sites to allegedly clean up the base. But what they did in that cleanup is they now made it available to the public. And there's tons of picnic tables out there, which you'll never see anybody. I've one time seen somebody picnicking out there, one time. It's not a place you want to picnic. If you want to take a picnic, you'll go to the beach or go to the other tables by the lighthouse. So it's sort of a bizarre scenario. But anyway, we did establish and change the at least the surface culture out there of the Montauk base. The Montauk project was a series of, the book is a series of recollections and facts of Preston Nichols' experiences, whereby he was being, I don't know how you say it, programmed. He was being put into an alternate state of consciousness, which was not his normal state of consciousness, and he was being sent out to Montauk, where he had a whole nother set of duties, in addition to his duties, which were at Airborne Instruments Laboratory on Long Island, and which is the company he worked for in regular reality. So he, and he also collected information. He also, as part of his job at AIL, was to study the Philadelphia experiment. And he read a whole classified file on that. So he had a lot of knowledge from that. And then he cross-correlated his information with a lot of people that were involved in the scientific aspects of the project, and also those who experienced it, whereby they were basically taking an individual's mind and amplifying it, trying to get at the psychic abilities of the individual and to amplify these out of radio transmitters, so that they would amplify into the culture. And of course, there were many reports of animals behaving strangely. We even have some of that on video. And there was also the stories of deers running into the phone booth. Deer ran into a place called Solivar's out there. It's a bar, restaurant, and crashed into the window. And for years, they had a mural of the deer crashing into the window. Strange animal behavior, strange human behavior, and there's always been plenty of strange human behavior out at Montauk. So eventually, the climax of these experiments was when they were able to harness the psychic, amplify the psychic, to be able to open up portals of time. And this is where the story becomes a little unwieldy, because you have stories, but it's hard to ground them. But while we were waiting for Studio B to come on, I listened to Studio A for just a few snippets, and they're talking about, people coming from Mars back and forth or whatnot. And that's all I caught, something about the Sumerians or something. And these stories, even those stories, they become unwieldy, they become ungrounded, they become, maybe they're true, but people kind of lose their bearings. And this is what happens when you get into the realm of time. And in the later day, in my adventures to Romania, things become a little bit more grounded, but it's still wild. It's sort of like Wild West, because while they become more grounded, it's an open-ended tunnel or vortex, if you will, that we're stepping into. The one thing that I would say is the main difference between Montauk and Romania for me. In Montauk, I was greeted like a leper, or like like I was like the crucifix to the vampires in Montauk. In Romania, I have been treated very, very nicely. It's like the opposite.
What a wonderful blessing, huh?
Yeah, well, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I had to pass a few gatekeepers in Romania, but the first trip was a little rugged. But basically, I have been welcomed and treated quite the opposite of the way I was greeted at Montauk, if greeted at all. It's like, let's shut the doors down on this person and not even let him know the doors are being shut down to him. So, but anyway, that's
Does
one
that
of the features. Go ahead.
does that have anything to do with culture and the secrecy that the United States government um, places on subject matter, anything to do with esoteria, and how they try to keep that knowledge just to the privileged few and not share it with others, or is the fact that you were dealing with different peoples and different culture in Romania, or what was the difference?
Well, the thing is about two big contrasts between the United States of America and Romania, who are incidentally in the last 15 years or so have become allies, political allies in ways they were never before. And this was over the discovery you were mentioning in the Bucegi Mountains, is how you say it.
Okay.
Bucegi, spelled Bucegi, but Bucegi is how they would say it in Romania, and Bucegi, and where there is a sphinx, and then they found, according to the book Transylvania Sunrise, which is available at skybooks.usa.com or on Kindle or at Amazon, that book talks about a chamber beneath the Romanian Sphinx that the Americans and Romanians opened up and sort of co-discovered. And because the Americans had the technology and the Romanians had the real estate. Now, the fourth book in what's called the Transylvania series, The Secret Parchment, goes into even deeper secrets, which the Bucegi Mountains are in Romania. They are in the Carpathian Mountains. They're not really in Transylvania. They're sort of close to the border. The border between, when I say border, I'm talking about the province of Wallachia, spelled with a W, Wallachia is how you say it, and Transylvania. These are two great provinces of the country we now know as Romania. And the Pulinari Citadel was the sort of station you would go in between those two. And that was the fortress or citadel of the famous or infamous character we think of as, or call Count Dracula, Vlad Tepes. And that was in between. He was the Prince of Wallachia, not Transylvania, as is commonly thought. But this area mentioned in the Secret Parchment in Transylvania, which is where I'll be going this summer and have been a handful of times or thereabouts, is far more precious secret real estate than this chamber beneath the Sphinx, which includes all sorts of holographic technology and uh, uh, what's called a projection hall, where you can look at the history of the world in holographic form. This area in Transylvania is much more political sensitivity. And it was so politically sensitive, as the book goes into, The Secret Parchment, that the Americans were just outraged at how dare could this upstart, relatively small country — Romania is not a small country, but compared to America or Russia in terms of real estate, it's about the size of Texas. And it's got tremendous wherewithal in terms of technology and land and resources, but always has. And they were saying, how could you dare have this on your territory? And they got very funny with the Romanians about it. There was a bit of a falling out, which I think was repaired. Last report, it was repaired. But the thing is, the difference between Romania and the United States of America is Romanians, even the Romanians who are not with the program as far as the stuff I'm talking about, they recognize that their country has a deep sacred tradition and an indigenous tradition that is their land. In America, we do not have that. We have no sacred ground in America that is of the United States of America. We have sacred ground that belongs to the Native Americans. Mm-hmm. So everything in America is a superimposition and a stealing of sacred ground, or misappropriation of sacred ground. One of the most sacred places being Montauk Point, which I discovered. So what you have is a population at Montauk that is adulterating the energy out there. These people do not belong out there. If you go into certain areas of Montauk, you will see huge, beautiful homes, millions of dollars, and they're empty because these are second homes for wealthy people. Mm-hmm. They have a culture of cocaine out there. Certainly drinking is a whole Hamptons, and it's not just having fun, it's excessive, and it is debauched, and it is they would just as soon wipe out all memory of my work and what has been said, as well, and worse than that, the memory of the indigenous people out there, or who belong out there, and whose land was misappropriated from them. So this is, when we talk about the difference of the two locations, these people are imposters, and this is part of the problem, and some of them don't even realize the situation, but many of them do. And this is unfortunately what we're dealing with. In Romania, it's quite the opposite. You have people that have been living on that land for thousands upon thousands and thousands of years, in Transylvania in particular, that have been tilling the same soil, processing the soil, cultivating it, preserving it. So when you eat food from those farms, it is in the same hands, the same DNA of the people. And for me, going there and spending time on what was essentially a farm, and you begin to drink the cow's milk. I normally do not drink milk. You begin to dream of the cow and the cow's friends, and I begin to have experiences. So it's like, it's a totally different thing. We're in America, we're brought up on the Jolly Green Giant vegetables and this sort of thing. And it's an abomination of nature. When you go over there, you begin to experience nature. I began to experience nature in a way that, it just could not access in the civilization that I have lived in the United States of America.
Right, because everything's imported and brought in from very distant locales. We don't support like the local farmers and the local growers, and I can imagine that with your experience there, that the food, the meals, your beverages, that it's all localized and it connects you to the culture and to the people in a deeper more profound way, and that certainly is not something that occurs on any kind of great way here in
It
the
can't
United
occur
States.
here. We're not set up for it. In fact, the the farmer, now the farmers in America only go back a few hundred years.
Hmm.
And I mean, because this land was all appropriated from the Indians. But
Right.
if you take the American farmer as a treat him as a noble creature trying to till the land and all this stuff, he's only been there a few hundred years. And then what success they had, there was a systematic takeover of the
Right.
American farm. It's been going on since at least, I grew up in part in a agrarian area, Davis, California, where one of the biggest and most prestigious agrarian universities. And the problems were very much recognized that the America farmer had been under assault for decades, if not more than that. So, and the whole capitalistic system was set up to own the farms and wipe out the individual farmers.
Right.
So this, whatever indigenous American folk food, folk wisdom that goes with the food was eradicated. So yeah, we're living in a schizoid culture that has undermined its own connection to nature, and this is something that, so we have here Whole Foods, and I was shocked to return to the city of Davis in 2014, which was known for its whole foods. And I mean, it's real health food and it's real farms. And the only place they had was Whole Foods. I was shocked. And Monsanto is very big on that campus now.
Hmm.
So it, we have a very challenging culture to live in, which is becoming more artificially intelligently oriented. And this is one of the big challenges facing us. And we might be getting, I can say we might be getting a little off topic, but we're actually getting more on topic, because this is the real issue, the challenge, the war against nature. And this very much involves what you would call the issue or war with regards to time, because the censorship on time and finding out about time is still very much in place.
Right. And well, and I think it's important to talk about these kind of things because it reflects in the way that even this generation is, the way that it's been brought up, and especially here in America, how so few are grounded, connected, and honor the sanctity of what they see happening around them as far as just the unfolding of creation. There's no respect for nature, and there's no respect for um, the the natural harmony of the way things unfold, and the way we grow food and the corporate monopolization of all of that. It reflects our total disconnect from the creator and the creation, and that is in large part, one of the major problems with what's going on in world is that disconnect. The fact that we don't even use heirloom seeds, and we're replacing all of these plants and these seeds, and the farmers that over generations and through many many decades, if not hundreds of years, finalized and created a seed which was beneficial and wholesome and healthy to the individual and to the health of the people that ate and partook of those particular seeds, and replacing them with genetically modified foods and seeds with engineered animal plant hybrid cross. I mean, it's insane. And those because the New World Order is schizoid in that manner, we see the destruction happening on a grand scale everywhere, and it's really sad. And until we can really connect back to our roots and honor this sanctity, like with the native peoples, um, respecting everything as sacred and honoring the whole creation as giant family, reflecting on everything as being a part of like a human body in the way that it works all together. And so I think these issues are important as well. Which I wanted to get you to comment on one other thing before we go into the story of the discovery there in the Bucegi Mountains, I believe is what
Bucegi, say, is it Bucegi or
Bucegi Mountain. Okay.
Bucegi is a little closer if you're going to Americanize it.
Yes, I'm trying to get it correct, so I appreciate your correction on that. But I I wanted to ask about the resurgence of the identity and the knowledge of the ancient Thracian peoples. And the reason I bring this up is because I've recently been working with a group that has brought forth the Thracian Chronicles, which are a number of stories that are not extant or available in the English. And I'm working with this group to bring these translations, which there's many, many different stories. Um, and and we're making this available. And it's only been recent that a gentleman named Dr. Stephen Guide and his brother were able to decode the Thracian script and the language of the Thracian. And what they did is they discovered that the ancient the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic system is a later version of this Thracian script. And they wrote 4 books about it called the Thracian Script Decoded. And so there's a resurgence in the identification there in that area of these ancient peoples and these ancient traditions. And a lot of people are now looking to those traditions to get a better understanding of who they are as a people in that area. Uh,
Okay,
we'll be right back.
Thracia is. Oh, we'll
Hold
get
on.
back. Okay, when we get
Yeah,
back.
when we get back, we'll be right back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. I'm your host, Zen Garcia, and I have with me as guest this evening, Peter Moon. Peter, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and get you to comment on that, and then we'll try to go into the story and of Romania and your travels there.
Well, what you say about the Thracians is completely identifies with the story of Romania because for those who are not familiar with the Thracians, they are the ancient culture of basically what the Greeks called Hyperborea. And Hyperborea means above the north or above the north winds. And this referred primarily to the area north of the Danube. Now, the Danube, north of the Danube is Romania, south of the Danube, in this particular area, north of Greece, south of the Danube is Bulgaria. And you can drive straight down Bulgaria into Greece. I have visited Bulgaria, traveled great distances across the country. There's so much to see there. I got to see a lot of sacred sites, but I was told there's so many more. Got to visit the Temple of Orpheus, which is only about 40 kilometers north of Greece. So I got indoctrinated into Thracia, so to speak. But Thracia, when we colloquialize it, it's mostly a lot of that Bulgarian, ancient Bulgarian culture. But it also refers to the ancient culture of Romania, which is colloquially referred to as Dacia or Dacia, D-A-C-I-A, which is where we get words like Deutsch, Deutschland. Deutsch is connected to phonetically and Dutch. But anyway, this is the home world, is the area Dacia, Transylvania. And the reason it's the home world is because it was surrounded by mountains during the Ice Age, and it was protected, it was insulated. And it was the only area in the Eurasian area there that was protected. Tibet was protected too. So anybody who was alive as those ice ages came, they had to go into this area or die, other than maybe a few isolated pockets here and there. But this was, so our culture generally emerged from this area. And Thracia is a name that equates to Troy. Troy is like three, Thrace. It's Troy, it's connected, the same culture. And there's two ways to look at the Thracians. One is as the Thracians, and you can read all about their different factions or whatnot, but there's the Proto-Thracians, those who came before the Thracians, which are really the earlier primary culture. So when you start digging up, people start talking about Proto-Thracians, not just Thracians. But yes, their culture, Egyptian culture, any latter-day culture, even the Hebrew culture, is an imitation of earlier cultures. You will see this. Now, according to ancient tradition in Romania, their god was Zalmoxes. Zalmoxes which a name means phonetically leaping god. Zal is like salmon, which leap, to leap. And Moxes is like the same word as Moses. And it's phonetically transmogrified. And Zalmoxes is said to have taught Pythagoras. He is said to have taught the Christian, or the foundations of what became the Christian religion, the Zoroastrian religion, the Egyptian religion. So he is a man who was initiated in the caves of Romania. He was a man, and he was taken into the cave by the spirits, the indigenous spirits of Romania or Transylvania, which are called Solomonari, much like the word Solomon. It comes from sun and moon, Solomon, Solomonari. And this is what they're called, long before there was stories about a King Solomon. And this was upsetting to certain priests and friars who came into the land and saw that they were called Solomonari, so made up stories that they made up the word Solomonari. But this is not the case. So you have this indigenous culture that goes way back into history, and in our later iterations repeat it. So yes, this backs up what you were saying by these scholars who I'm not specifically familiar with, but I'm very interested to hear of their work. Now, I have visited a place in Bulgaria, which is, I said I was about 40 miles from Greece. Well, over on the other side of Bulgaria, I was about 40 yards from Turkey, and this is an area known as the Temple of Bubastis, or Bastet, the Egyptian cat goddess. We know her as the Egyptian cat goddess, but her home was in Bulgaria. She was buried there. There's a very fascinating story of an excavation that took place there by, I believe her name was Ludmilla, the daughter of the Bulgarian dictator. And this was upset all sorts of esoteric stuff in Bulgaria. I mean, it was I wrote about it in my book, The White Bat. I've got 3 or 4 chapters on Bulgaria, and it includes this story of this expedition. And it's a very guarded issue to this day, because there were artifacts found, and there's always a black market. There's a whole black market for gold artifacts in Romania and Bulgaria. These are two, I guess what you call source cultures that are very rooted into the history of man. The Bulgarian culture has, the third letter is Vede, and Vede, this is where the Indians get Vedic from, Vede. Their Ayurvedic medicine is Bulgarian folk medicine. So you had this invasion or migration from Central Asia, Central Europe, Asia, Eastern Europe into the India area as well. So a lot of this culture carried forth. And there's a lot of confused history in the history books about this, but as you begin to explore it, now there's a whole cave network that goes down from Romania all the way down south into Bulgaria. And there's, I think in Bulgaria, they're a lot more accessible or easier. I don't know if they're as guarded as the ones in Romania, but certainly you can see certain ones in Romania, you can see certain ones in Bulgaria. So this is a very ancient culture that was an underground culture. And I guess what you'd say, both of the Romanians and the Bulgarians are not so anal retentive about their underground culture, like we have, as we are in America. I mean, it's becoming more open. They have, even the History Channel has underground cities and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very sensitive topic. Even the underground areas of New York City, they were very highly guarded and regulated.
There seems to be also, along with a lot of these ancient cultures, the discovery of, as you said, these underground, cave systems and underground cities. Like even in um, Los Angeles, there was that old story about the city of the lizard people that was built underneath Los Angeles. And
It's right near Chinatown in Los Angeles.
yeah, and so in many times when you have these discovery of these very ancient structures, even like with there in Egypt, these rooms underneath the paw of the Sphinx, which will lead us into the story of the Bucegi Mountains, as you were talking about. So can you go ahead and elaborate on that,
Certainly.
and that will set us up for the next show.
Okay, well, in the underneath the Sphinx, in around 2003, they discovered a chamber, and in this chamber, it was an ancient chamber. They estimated it might be 50,000 years old, and there were tables that were very, I guess they look modern to us, and they were about 6 feet high, meaning the people that operated them were ostensibly giants. And they found a lot of giant skeletons in Romania. But if you put your hand over a certain section or segment of the table, it would read out a corresponding holographic form of your DNA and what your DNA would look like. And then if you got it closer to the table, it would read it more microscopically, down to the molecular level, down to the atomic level, etc. So there were other tables that if you had put your hand over a segment, it would read out the DNA it would show the DNA and the form, the genetic structure, including what it would look like of an animal or a species from another planet, and it would show a holographic depiction of the star system and where it came from, the constellation, the planet. And then if you put your hand simultaneously over another one, which would show another species, it would show a hybridization of the two species. They could be from different planets. They could be from the same planet. So this was a DNA blueprint room, sort of like a Noah's Ark, with all the potentials for DNA. This is an interesting concept in and of itself. Now, another part of this chamber featured the projection hall I alluded to earlier. The projection hall was a biofeedback, bioresonant, I should say, device whereby if you looked into it, you would see the history of the world. If I looked into it, I'd see the history of the world, but it would be different. It would be bioresonant with my DNA, which means that if my ancestors were different from yours, it might have a little different slant to it. If my interests were different than yours, it might be different. The protagonist in the book, Radu Shinemar, he goes there and he sees 45 minutes or an hour of the world, the history of the world, which includes the whole dynamic structure of the localized area and how it was preserved from earthquakes and the like, and floods, and how the area was literally propped up with mountains and whatnot. So basically, then there's another part in the projection hall which has 3 tunnels go underground. One goes to Tibet with offshoot tunnels to Mongolia and to the Baghdad area in Iraq, where there are similar installations. There is another one, which is a different sort of tunnel, that goes to Egypt, goes to the Giza Plateau, where there's a similar installation that one of the characters travels to, and he's able to go back in time mentally, but not physically. The third tunnel goes into the inner earth. And based upon my experiences, I believe it would take you, if you knew all the right twists and turns to take, to an inner area in Transylvania that's deep within. See, there are huge gold deposits in Transylvania, in an area known as the Valley of the Golden Thrones. Huge amount of artifacts. Some of these artifacts have been smuggled into the black market. And there's real gold there, and there's tunnels underneath these things, and ancient civilization like you wouldn't believe. So this is where there is also supposed to be the center of time. Now, we can get into this in a future show, but if people go to my website, digitalmontauk.com, there are still some podcasts there. They'll be moving. But if you go to podcast number 7 and podcast number 8 at digitalmontauk.com, you'll see an introduction to who David Anderson is. He's the one that brought me to Romania, and also an interview with him as of June. And he talks in this interview about an area, in this area being a discharge of a time reactor took place there 200, 2000, or 2000 years ago. This is scientific. I'm not going to explain why it's scientific, but I was in that cave, much to his surprise. He did not know I'd been in that cave, and I will be going back there this summer, treating it as a priority, only because of what he has told me about the cave. So these are, some of the adventures I will be pursuing.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating, and I wish that we would have had even more time this evening, but certainly after the show, we'll set up, when again you can join us, and that we'll be doing a series of shows, because as I said, there's just so much information and so many questions that I'd like to ask you in connection to the stories that you've been involved in. And I want to honor your stories and the profundity of them by giving you ample amount of time to relax and go into them and to cover them in detail. And so, would you please talk about, just in the few minutes that are remaining, about how the story of how the the Bucegi Mountains, the inner structure with the ground penetrating radar, and how they approached your friend, and how they were made aware of the connections between Egypt, and then the Freemasonic gentleman that got involved with the story as well.
Well, basically, there was the Pentagon had access, understandably, military satellites that have very advanced ground penetrating radar. And they were able to detect that underneath this Sphinx area, which if you go to on Google Earth, you'll see it blocked out. A lot of these areas are blocked out that I'm talking about, or covered with, AstroTurf or something, or they're not AstroTurf, but it looks like AstroTurf, what they put it on Google Earth. So they were able to see that there was an underground chamber of some sort, and they were very curious about it. Now, the go-between the Pentagon and the U.S. military and the Romanian secret service department called Department Zero was an Italian Freemason named Mazzini, Signor Mazzini. And he claimed to be part of the Bilderberger group. He was definitely an Italian Freemason, and he had his people in the Pentagon. This was not being done under the directorship of George Bush or any of his people. It was being done by a Masonic faction in the Pentagon. And the Freemason basically sought out the guy in Department Zero who was the director, Caesar Brad. And Caesar Brad had been groomed into this position since he was born with a huge umbilical cord that they couldn't cut. He became under the scrutiny of the Securitate, the security force, who then brought in a man from China who was the head of the paranormal department. He was brought in from Red China because he was skilled in developing paranormal departments for countries. And this Chinese man, known as Dr. Zien, took Caesar under his tutorship, and he basically groomed him to be the head of Department Zero. So, which he eventually, by this time, was in charge of it. And this Italian Freemason came to him, and Caesar was very surprised, because how could this Italian Freemason even know that I exist, let alone I'm the head of Department Zero? And how does this guy speak Romanian so well? Now, he was Italian. It's not hard for Romanians to speak Italian at all. It's not so easy for Italians to speak Romanian. Romanian being the root language, not Italian, not Latin, but it's much closer to Latin than Italian is. But in any case, so who is this guy? Well, somehow he knew this stuff, and he was engineering to get at what was in that chamber, this Italian. So there's a lot of political intrigue about how this Italian Freemason is trying to wiggle his way into this. But it doesn't quite go right for him. And basically, this character Caesar is portrayed as a very decent, honest person who used to, I guess he didn't used to, he one time had a visit with a very famous Romanian mystic priest named Arseni Boca, very famous in the Orthodox faith. I've even visited his grave. And Arseni Boca basically had great abilities. And he told Caesar that the whole country was going to have it, the whole world was going to have its focus on Romania. Great things were going to happen in this country. He died around the time of Ceausescu's death. I think it was prior to Ceausescu, because Ceausescu used to go to him, and he told Ceausescu, he says, "You better change your ways, or you're going to be gone." And sure enough, he was right. Ceausescu was executed, but and the whole country of Romania changed. But in any case, Caesar was engineered. He was the one that was able to actually figure some things out so that the Romanians and Americans in a joint force could penetrate this area. So it was guarded by, protocol, with Romanians and Americans both participating in the discoveries and whatnot. And some of the other books get into this. Mystery of Egypt in particular goes into some of the technology that the Americans developed and brought over to go exploring, the tunnel system to Egypt and whatnot, which is utterly fascinating. It reads like sci-fi, but it's very good sci-fi, because it's like, how could they be making this stuff up? Some of the equipment they did, and one of the neatest things is the holographic computer they talk about. One of the Americans brings along an holographic computer. In other words, so it, the keyboard is holographic, and he can touch the holograms and it'll make the computer work, and it'll put a holographic screen out. And he says, this is just a satellite compared to the one we have at the Pentagon, which is huge. much bigger computer. So you get some very interesting advanced thinking in the book. And this book, particular one, is Mystery of Egypt. I'm referring to the third book in the series. Transylvania Moonrise is the second book in the series. Transylvania Sunrise being the first. Moonrise might be the most interesting of all. I haven't mentioned it because there we're taught about an alchemical tradition where you find out that this Chinese doctor is really a sort of a disguised Tibetan priest who got out of Lhasa and when the Dalai Lama was on the run. He was part of the court, and he ended up in China becoming head of the paranormal department. And he is arranged to meet the author of the book, Radu Sinamar, through a very interesting intermediary named Eleanor, who's been initiated into an alchemical tradition where you can live hundreds and hundreds of years. And this gets into a very intriguing story, an intriguing tradition. I'm supposed to meet Eleanor one of these days. I don't know when it will happen. I have an idea of when it might happen, not specifically, but when certain things happen, it might manifest. So there's a lot of intriguing characters in all of these 4 books in the series, and I've added a 5th book called The White Bat, which not only summates the books, but gives a whole overlay into how I got involved in all of this stuff and how my dreams were feeding this back even before the Montauk Project happened in my life. So there's a lot of interesting characters. Each book has a diverse twist and turn. Skybooksusa.com. Scientifically and mathematically, it's written so that a 7th grader can understand it. And if you can't understand it, it's only because there's a few concepts or words that you need to bone up on a little bit. You can go back and look at it multiple times and you will understand it. It's not that hard. So this has been simplified from the work of Dr. David Anderson, who befriended me in 1999, having read the Montauk Project. And we've had a collaboration over 17 years. And he flew me to Romania in 2008. And he participated with me in seminars in Romania in 2009 and tutored me on some of the concepts that you will see in these videos. They're all simplified from his website, andersoninstitute.com, to bring the whole idea that time travel is simple in its principle. Of course, technologically, it's like, how long it took humanity to figure out how to have a color television set that worked. For those of you who weren't around in the early 60s, most of the color TV sets did not work well. And it was only until the 70s that they began working with regularity and no problems. So it's the same with the technology of time travel. You can look at the theory. It can be relatively simple, but there's a lot of work that's gone into it. Of course, now we're at the area of restriction and consciousness and censorship and all this sort of thing. So this is where the work becomes not only interesting, but it becomes challenging and has to be peeled back because we're dealing with issues of censorship, and that means occult, which means secret or hidden. So that's an introduction to what I've done and what I'm up to now.
Well, I know that the listening audience and the world in general are the chat room that Peter has agreed to join us again, even before these issues occurred, because in having looked at and studied your work, I know that you have a tremendous amount of knowledge, and I didn't want just to, you know, do a 1 hour or 2 hour introductory to all of your work because I feel like it's so profound and so deeply introspective that really you would just need that amount of time even to establish the foundation for getting into the deeper aspects of it. And so, if you would please tell people where they can go to support and find your work and then we'll get into some of the things that you've written about, because I believe you've written more than 16 books. Is that correct?
I've published about 20. Yeah, I've written about 16, more or less. You kind of lose track. I guess when you get up close to 100, you start, counting them.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, that's a very, very profound amount of work.
but in any case, I'm just curious. I was in the chat room a little while ago. I'm not in the chat room now. Do we do we have much of an audience period? Because I know we could have lost some of them because of all the technical difficulties.
Oh yeah, no, there's quite an extensive audience, and yeah, if you go to freedomslips.com, you'll see that there are still a large number of people that have been patient and waited for us to resolve the issues. And so now that we're live, yeah, things are, there's still
Okay.
quite a bit of audience, and also there's a lot of people that listen to the archives. So.
Okay, well, I'll start out by, recognizing that many people will be familiar with me that have heard me
Yes.
on Revolution Radio many times before,
Right.
and I know there's always some new people that come along. And right now,
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
All right. I think everyone that we are connected to Studio B now, and so let me know if you can hear me in the chat room, and I'm gonna go ahead and bring Peter on and see if we can get this thing rolling. All right. Thanks for your patience, and again, we apologize for the technical difficulties, everyone. Peter, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, and again, I apologize. Let me, I believe we've got everything resolved, and the server has been freed up. And as long as everybody is able to hear me in the chat room, we should be good. And once again, I apologize to everybody and to you, Peter, for the technical issues. It's never happened this way where we've lost one server while the other one was up and remaining. And so, thank you for your patience, and I do look forward to um, continuing this discussion, and also know, for those of you that are in
Period where I can go back on all of the writing that I've done, adventures, which includes many adventures, and recapitulate it, go back over and now, because as you were saying, is the work is very long. It's an intensive study, and there will always be people who will want to read it for the profundity that it offers. But we're now in an age of new media, and the soundbite, the Instagram, and for those who follow astrology, I have Pluto going right over my Mercury right now, or sort of hovering over my Mercury, which is of course, the planet of communication and writing. And I was told by an astrologer a few years ago that when this happens, people will have to pay attention to my writing. And I sort of had the opposite effect last year when I released my book, The White Bat, releasing it during a similar period we're in now, Mercury retrograde, because I need to transition into new modes of communication. And this has been done as of November I signed up with Kajabi software. It's a software program or site that enables you to store all your videos and whatnot. And I've created 9 videos on time travel theory explained, 7 of which have been released to the general public, which you can access if you go to digitalmontauk.com. Will take you straight there. Anybody has problems getting having that work, there's a small percentage of people who can't access the videos. They can write to us at skybooks@yahoo.com, and we can take care of it, guide you through step by step as needed. So these videos explain the theory of time travel. I've been in a transition period where you would say that, okay, I'm a writer and I've written primarily about the subject of time travel and its related tentacles. You just don't write about time travel without having tentacles connected to it, such as issues of control and censorship around technology. Now, my work begins with the Montauk Project Experiments in Time, in which I essentially worked as a ghostwriter, presenting the story and theories of Preston Nichols, an expert in electromagnetics and somebody who experiences in time travel and with the technology of time travel at Montauk, New York, the eastern end of Long Island. This program was primarily during the 70s and very early 80s. Now, from there, I went to investigate his claims and his story. And while most, if not practically all of the data trail was shredded, I began to, when I investigated it, I began to have experiences with synchronicity. We could also call it quantum resonance, which I wrote a subsequent book, Montauk Revisited: Adventures in Synchronicity, followed by Pyramids of Montauk, having found that there were ancient pyramids on that land at Montauk, and that the family name of the local Indian tribe, who were designated as the Royal Tribe of Long Island, were the Pharaohs, with connections to Egypt. Now, that sort of began what I was doing as a writer. But so I was saying that I'm in a transition period right now. I've written for over 20 years, and I'm now in a